So this use case that we're going to talk to here, and Tom's asked me to reintroduce myself. So again, Cody Cornell in Swimlane with Bryon Page doing the demo. But what we're going to walk through is basically how organizations think about the value proposition and the risk reduction that comes along with automating phishing response. What we'll do is kind of work through this from a team perspective and actually how this come to fruition for one of our customers and kind of give you a look at how that works from a board perspective and how that gets reported. So we'll jump forward here and I'm going to kind of walk through this use case. So this is actually drawn from our experiences. This is what one of our customers went through. And this is kind of how they got to the point where they realized that automation was a key component of how they're going to make their security team better. So we'll jump forward here, show one slide that would have come out in that board meeting. And this is probably a CISO or a head of security, but the customer had a security event in the previous year. It was associated with phishing or business email compromise. And basically, because of that, they needed to implement security awareness training, which isn't abnormal, but you'd be surprised the number of Fortune 1000 organizations that are still putting this type of stuff in place. And what they did is implemented security awareness training, was really successful. They got a lot of people trained. They learned how to identify phishing. They set up a mailbox, which is a really common way to do this, have users forward those emails into an email box. But what they ran into was the number of submissions they got was really more than their security team can handle. So they started getting those emails in the thousands. The number they could actually review themselves, which is, was a small percentage, but the efficacy or the actual targeting that was happening with those phishing emails was actually really high. So they realized that they really needed to do this. The backlog was starting to get into the days to get responses done. So they, from a board down perspective, they realized that automation was probably the only way they're going to be able to kind of close this from a security gap perspective based on a historical security breach. So what Bryon's going to do is kind of jump in here and kind of we'll fast forward a couple of weeks and kind of look at what the automated process for triaging, analyzing, and responding to phishing emails looks like for an organization once they've implemented this. So let me pass over to Bryon here.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Cody. So yeah, as an analyst at Bank Mega, I'm loving automation, right? So, prior to having Swimlane in place, I was literally spending all day, all hour working on just phishing triage. Everything was proactive. I wasn't able to do anything reactive. Once we had automation in place, we were able to do a lot of things at machine speed without me having to do anything from that initial preparation phase. So, some of those basic items is when that email came into that mailbox, I was basically having to open up that email. I was going to have to look at the sender, the subject, the attachments, basically pull out all the IOCs or the indicators of compromise to understand what exactly is this? Is this a malicious email? Is it suspicious? Is it spam? How many people in Bank Mega received this same email? So I was having to query our Office 365 to understand who was in scope. Once I had extracted those indicators, I was having to log into multiple tools for enrichment using things like virus totals, recorded future, anomaly for sandboxing, hybrid analysis, etc. And then, of course, once I did all that upfront work, I then had to make that determination of, okay, is it malicious? Is it suspicious? Is it benign? And then I'd have to respond back and keep that end user apprised of what exactly was happening. And then, of course, remediation was even more painful, right? I mean, I would have to log into multiple tools, whether it was blacklisting at the gateway, depending on who the individual was. I would have to open up tickets in my ticketing systems. That way I could find out what was going on or be able to get the approvals to actually block those emails at the gateway or delete those emails from the mailbox. And then, of course, as we go through the workflow here, we're going to actually show the entire case management in what's been built and presented for me as an analyst. Now, the dashboards themselves, this is actually a huge saving on my part, right? So as an analyst, I always have to apprise my managers and my executives of, how are you guys doing as a team, right? What's my mean time to detection? What's our dwell time? What's our response time? And so with these dashboards that are built out of the box, I could just come up here and say, schedule this report, give it a name for my weekly or daily report. I could resize any of these. So if I want to make it specific to a certain boss that likes the view to be exactly what they want it to be, I could just put those values in there, give it a name, add my notes, specify who it's going to at Bank Mega, and I can just schedule this report, right? So, in addition to doing the IR triage and workflow, I was spending hours a week just on reports. So it's been very beneficial from that aspect. So let's actually jump into a phishing incident. So again, the preparation work has been done for me, right? Swimlane ingested the email. They pulled out all the indicators. They submitted all of those IOCs to one or multiple threat intel sources. The results came back, giving me that determination of suspicious, malicious, benign, etc., based off of one or multiple sources. But then another key benefit is it did automatic correlation for me, right? So before this, I would have to query through tickets through our ticketing system to understand, have we received this or a similar phishing email from maybe a slightly modified or obfuscated subject or attachment or sender of these emails, where within Swimlane, correlation happens out of the box. So I can come in here and I can see there were various multiple correlation keys where I can see, hey, we've seen similar senders, similar subjects, similar indicators, etc. And then, of course, I can have a nice visual of the details itself, right? So instead of having me to see the raw data or the raw headers, I can just see a nice, quick, easy snapshot of the email itself, just as I'm doing that initial determination. Now, as I drill down or dive into this particular case, if I want to see the details, I can absolutely dive into that. And I can see, username, host name, domain, host IP, sender, subject, etc. And this is kind of the nice thing about the initial enrichment. As an organization, if a phishing email comes in, depending on who the recipient is or the device that they may be owners of, I may want to classify this or have the criticality be different, right? If this is somebody from, the legal team or an executive or somebody that's a VIP or a critical asset, I want those details. So it's not just about doing enrichment with threat intel. It's about doing enrichment and gathering context from querying tools like a CMDB, like my asset database, my identity provider to understand, is this a risky user? Is this a VIP? Is this a critical asset? So all of these are,
Bryon?
Yes.
Sorry, this is Scott. You mentioned IOCs, correlations. Who's managing that? Is that built into your engine? Am I managing this as the user? Can you just go one shade deeper?
Yeah, great question, Scott. Yeah, so the correlation is defined during the initial configuration of Swimlane. So there's a plugin within Swimlane that has two components. There's the definition of the correlation keys, which is what do you want to do correlation against? So a phishing email, I may say I want to do correlation against IOCs, sender, subject, and attachments. So that's part one. Part two is the actual correlation itself. So once we've collected those keys using hashing and a couple other technologies, we then say, well, okay, do you want to correlate back 30 days, 60 days, the entire existence of Swimlane, right? In addition to that, we can do things like fuzzy hashing and leveraging distancing against URLs and IPs, etc. So there's the two pieces of correlation is it's managed by Swimlane, but you as an organization can define what those keys are and then how you do correlation against those keys.
And the nice part of that is, obviously our goal, a lot of the folks on our team, our research team, spent years doing threat hunting and incident response. They provide some recommendations, right? You're not trying to decide, is it most important to do subject or if it's most important to do a URL or whatever it might be. We have some recommendations that are there. And the nice thing is if you need to tweak those for your environment, your vertical, whatever it might be, that's really easy to do.
Good point. Thanks for that, Cody. Okay, so as an analyst, I've reviewed my initial details. And the nice thing is whether I'm a seasoned analyst or maybe I'm onboarding some new people on my team or I'm doing staff aug, we have the ability to provide checklists for your organization. So, with me, I can say, well, I need to review the source alerts, the source records. So I'm looking at all the details associated with this particular case. And then, of course, I can kind of move on to, if it's a true positive, let's kind of look at the response actions. So again, as I mentioned before, prior to having automation, it was a manual process for me to be able to do any type of IR action. So whether it was doing a bulk notification of emails, blocking a particular sender at the gateway, doing blocks at a firewall or a proxy, Maybe there was an associated workstation that I wanted to kick off a vulnerability scan, or I wanted to disable specific accounts based off of the severity or criticality of this incident. I've essentially taken tier 2, tier 3 actions and made it into a simple button action, right? So instead of me having to have skills and knowledge of multiple security tools and having to have multiple consoles open to perform these actions, I can simply leverage those technologies' APIs and leverage Swimlane to be able to execute those actions on my behalf, either in an automated fashion using the workflow or just tying it to an easy button for that tier 1 analyst to be able to perform. Now, depending on organizations, right, I may not have access to all my tools, right? So at the analyst level I'm at, I can do basic things like quarantine a file, blacklist a hash, maybe even quarantine an endpoint, depending on who the end workstation is, like it's not a VIP or a specific user. However, where there are cases where I need to be able to request an action to be performed, or I need to communicate with individuals, there's two ways that I can do it. If I'm a SOC user or I'm a consumer of Swimlane, I can actually do real-time collaboration and communication with my other analysts, right? So we can upload screenshots, we can do real-time communication. But then if I need to extend beyond the SOC and I need to communicate with individuals using existing productivity tools like ticketing systems or messaging platforms like Teams or Slack as an example, or even just old school email. Maybe I want to be able to do emails back and forth, right? The idea behind Collaboration Hub is this leverages and extends the ability for me to communicate across all of those channels based off of the criticality and or the scope of the incident. Now, another nice thing is I want to be able to standardize what responses look like and what actions look like. And so I can leverage Swimlane to pre-populate or pre-templatize basic responses for different actions or different incident types. So I could have a summary template that just gives me a snapshot summary of everything that happened in this incident. Maybe I want to have a pre-canned email response that goes to those individuals based off of my analysis, whether it was benign or malicious, or maybe I just want to do a free form. So again, I have the ability as an analyst to automate as many of those rinse and repeat or mundane tasks as possible, but then also give me the ability to freeform or modify or change or do anything custom that I want, but still falling in line with standardizing that process. Again, that was probably one of the big things that impacted Bank Mega prior to automation is they had standardized processes, but it was very difficult to implement. So each analyst that picked up a different case would have their slight nuances in how they handled stuff, and maybe they didn't follow the appropriate procedures and protocols, where with using case management and automation within Swimlane, we were able to standardize and templatize responses and actions, but then still give them some level of autonomy within the platform itself. So the last piece I'm going to follow up on here is tracking all of these components, right? So this was a major thing for our organization to be able to better track SLAs associated to a particular case. So as I worked through this case and I would escalate to incident response or resolve, mark as closed, perform specific remediation actions, we have the ability to timestamp all of those actions, right? So the initial dashboard that we saw from my executives showing me those things like dwell time or mean time to remediation, mean time to detection, that's based off of everything that's happening in each unique record. So this provides us with Swimlane as a system of record for everything that happened associated with a particular case, whether I performed a blacklist or something at the gateway or at the endpoint. It gave me the ability to perform those actions, but it also timestamp and track that. So then we can know from an after actions report perspective, what happened, who performed those actions, and when they were performed.
So I had a quick question about that before you move on.
Yes, Karen.
So great demo on the basics of checklists and statuses and triaging and all that stuff. How much of what we just saw what is like the core part of this, and how much of it was low code customization? Like, can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, great question, Karen. So within Swimlane, we have what are called Swimlane Solution Packages, or abbreviation, we just call them SSPs. So essentially, with these different SSPs, we have one called Quick Start, which essentially provides you everything out of the box that we just walked through. So it has the fundamental viewpoints of case management, threat intel enrichment, workflows around phishing workflows, alert triage, whether that's SIM or EDR, and things like domain sweating, et cetera. So yeah, a lot of this stuff is pretty much pre-baked out of the box. The only thing that is essentially defined or configured on the back end in a customer's environment is those specific connections to those third-party tools. So there may be some customers that are QRadar shops for a SIM versus a Splunk versus something else like an Alien Vault, et cetera. So everything's pre-built from a workflow standpoint. It's just making those back-end connections for those specific technologies to be able to execute or implement these workflows.
And I guess to add on top of that, the element that makes it really powerful, to your point about low code, is that no two organizations do security operations the same way. So the nice part is that when you do need to modify this to adjust for an SLA, or you have a different approving process, or you need to capture a different piece of specific information, that's a drag and drop element that you can do through the UI that adds that element in. It allows you to make it part of your business process. So you can trigger automations and notifications off of that. And you also capture it from a historical reporting perspective. So it rolls up to all your reporting. So as we get deeper into the demo, we'll actually show like an example of something that's very specific to an organization that, we as a vendor would never probably provide out of the gate, because it's just very, very, customer centric, where something like phishing or alert management or threat intel management are things that a lot of our customers use. So we provide them with those base building blocks that they'll tweak on their own to make really, fit their environment as best as possible.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think I'm just looking for, as we move forward, some indications of, what makes this an automation solution, a low code automation solution versus a solution that can be configured.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things that's, we'll call it the blessing and the curse of demoing automation is that you can't see it. So when Bryon talks about enrichment, that's happening before the analyst ever shows up in this case management view. Sending an attachment out to a sandbox and getting results back, and, having that present, pulling back process lists from a host that was targeted from a, whatever type of attack that might be. That stuff is happening, but it just kind of shows up as, static data inside of a case management system. But, as someone who spent about 15 years doing security analyst work, that's a lot of different browser tabs, a lot of different commands. It's a lot of different information that I'm trying to bring together. And by and large, I generally do the bare minimum because I'm human and I'm trying to get to the next one because there's a lot of them. So that moment where you can actually have this run automatically and have it, kind of continue to organically become more mature from a response perspective. So not just sandboxing, not just threat intel lookup. So you really get into, can I search these IOCs? Can I update a knowledge base? Can I, really improve the security posture of an organization in real time? Those are the things I really never got to as an analyst because I had to do everything by hand. And the nature of that is to do just enough so that you can get through the work and move to the next thing. That maturity, you really struggle with that because there's just so much work on your plate.
Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, and as you go through the demo, so it's Justin here. I'm interested in understanding what is part of Swimlane itself and what is talking to third-party things and using that automation engine side of things to take advantage of the ecosystem of third-party pieces, which is tricky when you're just seeing the Swimlane view of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think I guess maybe it's one of those things where we can kind of point out as we go, but I think every aspect of what you're seeing is actually an automation component. Like all the data doesn't start in Swimlane. If it's the mail itself, if it's the intelligence itself, if it's the information we're pulling from a policy perspective, all of that data is actually happening through probably an API call almost 95% of the time. So all this information is, automation from a data gathering perspective, or, as Bryon mentioned, and if he jumps back to like that case management view, there's that response component where he can push a button and an analyst purge an email out of the email system, can apply a new policy to an endpoint host, can, disable a user account via Active Directory or whatever it might be. So there's, it doesn't look like it because, again, it's the way the demo is structured, but it's all automation. It's all either automation from a data enrichment and normalization perspective, or in the capability to really take action in third-party systems. And I think that's, why the orchestration is the element that they, in the SOAR component.
And I think that's what I want to get at is when that happens is to point out that this is an API call to say, this is Swimlane telling Office 365 to take an action, compared to this is Swimlane telling a policy engine to go and apply changes to the environment, just to understand partly from an enterprise perspective, so I can see this is where the ecosystem plugs into Swimlane, and this is where Swimlane is directly controlling my infrastructure itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if Bryon kind of moved left to right in this second row of tabs here, we could probably talk through a few of these here. He has the email tab. So in most circumstances, in most customer environments, this is a call out to Microsoft Office 365 or Exchange Online. Like that's where this is probably most likely happening here. Where you're going to go and purge out this email box. When you start getting into like the firewall, proxy, and EDR, this is where we're probably going to, there's always this, block the port concept, which is not really how this works. Really what you're doing is talking to a centralized manager for your proxy or your network infrastructure, your perimeter, whenever it might be, and you're manipulating an ACL. Most organizations will have like a rapid response or an incident response ACL for their environment, and we'll add variables or take variables away from that ACL. And that's really how these are being manipulated. So, we're not going out and individually, manipulating network infrastructure on a per node basis. What we're really doing is modifying that centralized management policy, which, the nice thing is that happens in real time. You have a human in the loop if you want it, but it allows you to manipulate it in a way that's controlled, that, most organizations can get comfortable with, because you don't want to have to go through change management to update, something that's, requires immediate response.
Depending on the organization itself, some teams have the ability to do any type of change control based off the criticality of the incident, right? But if it's a low severity, but they still want to put in a block at a gateway or at a firewall or in an email gateway solution, et cetera, that button doesn't have to tie to that technology. That could tie to a ticketing system, which would encapsulate all the actions that I'm requesting to be performed, feed that to that ticket, and then monitor the status of that ticket to be implemented by that team that owns that gateway tool. And then when they perform that block or that action, we can pull that data back into Swimlane and mark this as resolved. So again, it really depends on an organization's business process of, can they have direct access and fix it based off the criticality, or does it need to go through a ticketing system and a change control window? Either way, we can accommodate it based off of the corporation's business logic.
So what's the code look like for what's behind here? Do you have can we see that? Instead of low code, I'd like to see the code behind all this.
Absolutely. So let me just kind of go into one of our applications here. We'll do it.
And while Bryon's navigating here, I'll make a comment. I think what he's kind of touching on here is the broad spectrum of how people are leveraging automation. So to your point there, to his point, there's a point where people are just creating a ticket, which, I'll be honest, isn't a terrible lot of automation, but that organization has decided that's their business process, that they have to get a ticket to make that change. We also have the inverse, I would say, is the total opposite, is we have folks that are taking in something like a phishing email, processing and automatically generating like a Sigma rule or something they could put into their SIM as a search for bad behavior, and automatically propagating that out, right? So you have this really broad spectrum of, do I create a ticket? Do I manipulate an existing, rule, signature, policy, search, whatever it might be with a variable, to folks that are automatically creating signatures on the fly, and they might be doing that map to MITRE ATT&CK or map to Sigma rules, threat hunting patterns that they might have. So I'll let Bryon walk through the logic here, and there's kind of like everything else, we can peel back the onion more and more, right? We're going to start with the low code components, which is the business process workflow, and then how you can actually add fields and forms and run business process, how we tie those to integrations, all that's low code, and for a lot of part, no code. But if you needed to, and you needed to integrate into like your own environment, you had a proprietary system, you could pop the hood and actually, see the underlying integration itself.
So it's set up like a 5th generation language.
I'll be honest, I don't know exactly what a 5th generation language is.
It's more of graphical than it is actual code. But behind each of these conditions, ones if I wanted to add a new action, how would I do that?
Yeah, so again, your conditions based off of the fields that you're monitoring within that case. So when we get to our third use case here, there's fields around details that were pulled from like your identity provider, like an email address, or if we're querying tools to determine if its encryption's enabled, et cetera. So the condition itself is monitoring that field. So if that field has data or is changed, is equal to, does not equal to, matches regex, various ways that I can monitor the condition of that field. If that condition is met and to be true, I can then execute or create an action. And actions can be various things.
I want something more complex than that. This all makes sense with conditions. I need to pull a new piece of chunk of data based on MDM enabled equals no. I want to not show an action. I want to pull more data to find out from my MDM, for example, to find out why it was disabled.
Yep.
So one of the things could be device lost. Why would I want to re-enable it? I want to just clean it, wipe it. So how do I get more information into this that's not a condition?
Yep. Yeah. So the conditions based off of that previous ask. So we would have an API connecting to your MDM saying, what's the current status? Is it enabled or disabled?
Well, so you're saying we, who's we?
So with Swimlane, we would configure connectivity to an organization's mobile device management platform, leveraging that MDM API. So we're using the APIs.
So it's a brand new MDM no one's ever seen before.
Okay.
I know the REST API, you don't, no one does.
Mm-hmm.
How do when there's a lot of devices like this in the security world, how do I write something brand new that says, go query this data for this user off this MDM or whatever? It could be some other system of record that you have no access to and know nothing about.
Great question. So let me leave the workflow here, and we're going to talk more about defining or building custom tasks, right? So within my integrations, I can create either tasks that are native plugins in Swimlane, or if it's something custom that you want to build on your own, you can simply select to create a task, and you can actually build it using Python and request APIs, getting very granular. Yeah. So and there's two ways to approach it. So part of Swimlane's value prop is we have a global integrations team that builds plugins for our customers, right? So the idea of providing that scalability low code is we have a bench of developers that build integrations for our customers. So if they need a plugin for an MDM that's fresh off the market, nobody's seen it, we'll build that for you at no cost. That's part of our value add. Okay. If it's something that you want to build on your own, absolutely. You can fork our plugins and modify what we have existing, or you can actually just create a Python script or upload your own. So if you've already built your own scripts and you're just bringing automation to actually do the orchestration around your existing tasks or scripts that you use today, you can actually just upload your Python scripts and then pipe them into that workflow where we were previously of, if a condition is true, execute this action, which could be an existing Python script that you've maintained for years.
So to clarify, you guys, Swimlane will create brand new plugins for new technologies or existing private technologies, not the public ones. You'll do the public ones as well, or we can create it ourselves and just import it.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and the way that we see it is, if it's a commercial product that multiple customers might use, it's our responsibility to build it. Now, obviously, there's tens of thousands of products in the world, so we don't have them all day one. But if it's a commercial product, we'll build that integration. That's what we see as kind of part of our job, and it keeps this, really a configuration as opposed to a software development exercise for our customers.
It's not for this particular Luis case, but I want to understand where you get the data. So is it just people have to report a phishing or something else, and then you can analyze it? There's no automation or other sources where you get the tickets?
Yeah. So at the highest level, you can really use anything as a trigger, is what we would probably call it. So that could be, you could have a ticketing system like a ServiceNow. We could be querying a ServiceNow for a ticket to hit a queue. We could be watching a mailbox. We could integrate into a SIM and pull in alerts from the SIM. We could pick up a flat file that you drop in an S3 bucket. You could send us a syslog message. You could push something to our API. It really doesn't matter. Really what we're looking for is what's the state change that happens in your environment, via any one of those mechanisms and more, that would initiate an automation. And generally for most security teams, that's either a communication from a different department, right? So we'll get into a use case where HR notifies us about a user who's going to go travel that doesn't typically travel. Or it might be, I got an alert from CrowdStrike through their, SaaS UI, their centralized manager. Or it might be that, Recorded Future told us that, we just saw one of your credentials on the dark web and, you should do something about that. So these are all just places. Swimlane's somewhat like an octopus. We are listening in all sorts of different places, as many as you want us to. And anytime that a state change happens, we notice. And then we'll kind of take that in and, that might be, is data present? Does it contain this string? Is it above this threshold? Any data in that trigger we can use as a mechanism to initiate an automation.
But it's event driven. It's not scanning proactively for things.
We're not a vulnerability scanner. We're not an EDR product. We're integrating with all those investments. So we're generally in a situation where you probably have some monitoring in place, and that's where we are not actively out there scanning per se. We definitely got some interesting stuff that we do where we leverage different open source packages that folks are familiar with. So maybe you have an Nmat plugin, or maybe you have, you're using Snort or something like that. We can work with those things, but typically, again, that's an inbound or something that we're monitoring for changes, alerts, events, whatever it might be.
Okay, thank you. Makes it clear for me now. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, Cody, if I can jump in and ask you a question, and this is just a clarification of you guys' product position. I initially, when I watched the first demo and I heard you explain it, in my head, I was really thinking like, this is a replacement for like a SIM or some point of data aggregation, but it's really not, right? We're not throwing away our SIM. We're not throwing away other scanning tools, other data ingest. Instead, this is really just the plumbing between those tools, right? This sits in between and allows us to automate. I mean, you used the word triggers, but automatically sort of react based on events, based on triggered events. And this connects those tools. Whereas normally I might have, 3 or 4 different tools open on my screen. Here I can sort of orchestrate those tasks through code. I don't even have to have it up here, right? We can have someone build it and just have that as we work through a case. Is that correct? I mean, I'm just trying to sort of repeat back to you the way I've understood it so far. Am I hitting the nail on the head or am I way off?
No, so you nailed it, right? So as a security analyst, my ideal for me is that I get all my information in one place. All my technologies are integrated because, no tool is good as, by itself as it would be if it had additional information from other systems. My defense mechanism, obviously we all know defense in depth and we want to layer that on. But if I can take information and move it around, that's absolutely there. But there's some kind of second order things that happen when you do that, right? So now we have a system where I can see, I get so many alerts from so many different tools. But now I can see what are my false positive rates across my stack? Like, do I have tools that have high false positive rates? Do I have tools that require other third-party enrichment in order to be effective? They can't actually be remediated with the information that was there. I can see what team members are more effective. So I start getting this kind of interesting combination of machine data about, what's happening in my environment, what I need to respond to. And then I also have all the human element, what decisions were made? Why was this threat hunt a success? Why was it not? Why is this alert escalated? We see like a DLP alert that we thought was a DLP alert, but it turns out that was just a data transfer for a backup. So we can mark that as a false positive. Those are learning moments for new staff. They're tuning opportunities for the engineering team. There's just so much that you glean as kind of a second order value prop of bringing all this information together on top of, hey, I can almost respond immediately to everything if I have this configured to do that.